So our two seems like I have something is echoing. There you go. So our today's topic is primary and secondary data. So we're going to talk about we have these goals to understand the differences between primary and secondary data today, understand their definitions, differences, how they can be compared, how they can be integrated together, identify when to use each of these types, and then explore hybrid data strategies, which is the combination of primary and secondary data. And we'll work through a few real world examples. So to begin with, I'm going to start with an exercise. Suppose we want to study the stress levels among medical students and how we can collect the data. Actually, my plan, yes, surveys, yeah. My plan is to my initial plan was I was expecting more audiences, so we could actually split and talk about it. But yeah, definitely uh, survey, chart reviews. Yes, of course. So mhm, yes, yes, we can ask um, to the students, medical students, about stress related questionnaire. We can give them stress related questionnaire, and we can also, as you mentioned, secondary type of information like their CGPA, their academic records, and then we can also ask them about their sleep data. Then also ask them about the sleep data, their counseling visits, how that went, and their experiences. And also, we can we all have smartwatch nowadays. We count how long we are walking or running, what is our heart rate, stuff like that. We can also collect that data also. So, so the examples I have provided, we have some primary data, some secondary data here, right? So first, let's just walk through the definitions and examples of primary and secondary data. So what is a, we all understand that what is primary data? Are primary data is that we collect in first hand. Researcher collect by himself or the data collectors, they collect this data. And examples can be, as Dr. Chandu responded earlier, surveys, interviews, experiments, clinical trials, then observations, just observing the individuals. And the key features are these data are collected directly by the researchers, by the data collectors, and it is directly connected to the research question, and so the reason it is directly connected to the research question is because the researcher knows what he or she is trying to find out, what is their research questions. So they can measure the variables, they can add variables, they can remove variables, whatever they need, whatever tools they require to answer their research question. And then this is high control over quality and method, meaning the accuracy of the data. If there are any biases, if they can actually minimize the observer's bias, the sampling bias. So there are a lot to do in terms of controlling the quality of the data in primary data analysis, data collection. Can see it? Oh, I didn't share. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. Uh, so uh, we have, so what are the advantages of primary data? So primary data, since this is directly related to the research question, so that is an advantage, and it is very critical to our research question, very specific and critical. And as I was talking, this has high accuracy in terms of handling missing values, in terms of handling duplicates, also biases like observer's bias, recall bias, sampling bias, and
Data
um,
specific.
oh, and it also enables us to add new variables if required. So if you're using some data that is recorded previously and that itself is not answering our research question properly, so we can actually collect new variables, meaning primary data, to answer our research question. Then there are also some limitations for primary data. It is expensive and time consuming, and it requires expertise in design and study design and data management. So if we have a lot of data, we probably need someone with skills, someone that who has skills in softwares like SQL, Oracle, to manage our data. Then that requires more money, and then we require, so in primary data, sometime we might have small sample size due to resources because it requires time and it is expensive. And there are also, we probably require the internal review board's approval, informed consent from the participants. So these are the limitations of primary data. Let's move on to the secondary data. In secondary data, what is the secondary data? As we all understand, the data that is previously collected and we are using it in a second hand, meaning we got this data from some government website like CDC, WHO, or some census data. And it can be hospital record, hospital health record, or insurance data, the data that insurance companies collects, and then academic repositories like Kaggle, where we can use free data sources. We don't have to pay anything. Uh, there are many sources to use secondary data. The advantages of secondary data can be think of. This is very cost effective and time saving. So if I wanna do some analysis now, something came into my mind, I wanna check, and then I can just go into the website and try to figure out those data, and it will take me to download the data probably few minutes. That's it, and I can have abundance of data. I can have large sample size, and then it enables repetitive measures and comparative studies. Can validate or supplement, also can validate and supplement primary data. Suppose I already have a primary data and I want complementary data to support my primary data. Then I can actually get some secondary data to actually complement my primary data. Also, there are some limitations. Data may not fit our research questions exactly. Suppose we're trying to find out something and we don't have, um, suppose from our earlier example, we are trying to find out the stress level of medical students, and we don't have their stress data. We don't have the variable that explains, that quantify their stress. So then that will actually be a challenge to answer our research question. And then we have limited control over the data quality and completeness, about the accuracy, the biasness. Somebody had collected this data on purpose to answer some research question, but I'm using it as a secondary hand. So there will be some gap between these things. There will be missing values, there will be outdated data, and also there are legal and ethical restrictions. So now, next we have hybrid data. What is hybrid data? As we can understand, this is a mix of both primary and secondary data. And an example we can think of, we have collecting a small survey sample, which is a primary data, and merging with a national data set, as the example I was trying to give, and then using hospital records plus follow-up interviews. So hospital records will give us, suppose giving us some quantifying results, and we want to know about more about the patients. So we require more explanation about the patient's experience. Then we collect the follow-up interviews. So the hospital data is our secondary data, and we are collecting primary data to complement the hospital data to get more explanation. There are a lot of benefits using hybrid data. It actually is very beneficial for validation and triangulation, and it provides richer insights and reduce cost in terms of since we are collecting secondary data. Now, before I jump into this, please. Yeah, sure, go ahead. Hmm?
National represent find a comparable sample.
Comparable?
Yeah, um, comparable sample from that national data set to compare to your own.
So let me just rephrase it to see if I understood the question properly. So Dr. Hernandez is asking, when we have a national data set, if that is comparable to the data set that I'm primarily collecting to answer my research question? Okay. So which one is better? What is your question?
The question is creating a hybrid data
Yeah,
set.
yeah.
You have your own sample
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
But you want to compare what's happening nationally. Do you want to find a national sample that's
Yeah.
similar to your sample? Gender, age.
Yeah, yeah,
etc.
definitely. That can be very helpful. That can be very helpful in a way. So when we are actually collecting primary data and we are doing some survey that validate in some way, in some geographic way, but national data is very huge, very large. That will help us to validate our result universally. Also, it can be sometime it can be like we are trying to answer some question, but we don't have enough variables. Suppose I have 5 variables, that is not answering my question. That is my primary data, but I don't have enough resource or time to collect more data. Then we can pull up the national data. We can pull up data, secondary data, to enrich our findings. Thank you, Dr. Hernandez, for your question. So before I move into this, I want to talk about the example we are talking about at the beginning. So we can have stress level data, right? We can have um, stress information about the medical students. What kind of data that is? That is a primary data, right? Since we are collecting this data from the students, medical students directly, then the medical records or their academic records, like their CGPA. What kind of data are those? Those are secondary data. Then the students' counseling data. We get those data from from uh, their counselors. So those are secondary data. Then if we collect the data, if we collect the smartwatch data from the students, then that is our primary data. Now, yeah, sure. Seems like I missed a slide.
I mean that when you have a question like that, how would you studying the impact of diet on mental health among college students? Most people will look at their research question and then they'll do some sort of literature search to see what is out there. So they'll get all these studies that have been done. Now, is their data secondary data then? Can they use that data and say that this study in Johns Hopkins, they looked at 600 students and this is what they found?
That's a very nice question. And so Dr. Sandhu is asking that when we are doing literature review, right? And we found some finding, and what kind of data is that? That's a secondary data, because that is already somebody has collected the data and they have all the findings with them. So those kind of data are secondary data. And now we have a scenario here. So we are studying the impact of diet on mental health among college students. So what kind of questions might arise? What are the things that we have to look into while solving a problem, answering a question like this? So first question, which type of data should we choose? Should we select? So it can be first primary data, it can be secondary data, it can be hybrid, right? Depending on what we're trying to figure out. So here, this is okay. So first, let's talk about variables. We have independent variables like diet pattern, the students' nutritional intake, their food type, calories, dependent variable as their mental health outcome, right? Like stress, anxiety, stuff like that. And to answer our first question, suppose we are trying to find out, we are trying to collect the primary data. Then we can conduct a survey among college students about their eating habits and mental health symptoms. And for secondary data, we can use an existing data like institutional records from the university or from the medical school that we are working with. We can find out those data. And for hybrid, we can actually combine them to answer our research question. Like suppose that stress, if stress has any correlation, or their CGPA or their academic record has any correlation with their food intake. If we find any correlation, so food intake or their dietary habit is here independent variables, and we are going to get the dependent variable, which is the stress. So we can find out correlation between these variables. So that is one kind of finding we can do. And then definitely that will give us, if we see a correlation, then that will imply something. If we don't find a correlation, that will imply that there is a correlation between, and depending on the numbers, what kind of result we have, we can say there is a strong, weak, or moderate or neutral correlation between these variables. Then when evaluating secondary data sources, we also have to be very we also have to be very strict about the criteria to evaluate the secondary data sources. We have to make sure that the data is relevance to our research question, meaning, does this data actually answer my questions? Then there are, so we're asking some questions, and we have to figure out what is my target population, what are the variables that I should look into. Suppose I'm starting something and my target population does not match that. I'm trying to find out some research question regarding obese people, and all the data target population inside my target population, all the data I have is from healthy people. Then that won't answer my research question, right? So we have to be very very careful about our secondary data sources. And then data quality and completeness. If there are any, so is the data accurate, consistent, complete? So how well variables were measured when these data were collected? We have to look into the dictionary. We have to see the consistency of definitions, amount of missing data, amount of duplicates. We have to look into these things. And then when the data was collected, the recency and time coverage of the data. Suppose I'm doing some study and my data was collected 20 years ago, and some natural calamities happened in that area and people moved out to other place. Probably that won't be appropriate to use the same data 20 years later to answer my research question, right? So we have to find out updated data. We have to make sure that the data is recent. And definitely there are questions about accessibility and licensing. So is the data enough to reflect current trends? Sorry, is the data, can we access the data? Is there any legal issues? Do we have to pay anything? Is the data free or not? Is there any ethical and legal restrictions? And we can download the data from using different format. So we have to make sure which format we want the data to be downloaded. Also, there are softwares. Nowadays, it's not a problem, I would say, because we can handle different formats. So everything is so easy, and technology is very sophisticated now, so we can handle everything. But that can be a challenge to someone who is doing their research, someone who is not very sophisticated. Now we have another example, another workshop. So here we have this is a data integration exercise. We have primary data and secondary data. In case A, we have survey data set. Case B, we have administrative data set. And a survey of 300 medical students. We have a survey of 300 medical students, and from the primary data, we have collected the data for the students' stress level, hours of sleep, self-reported dietary habits, what year they're studying, M1, M2, M3, M4, and also their student ID. And for the secondary data, administrative data, we have their CGPA, course grades, project completion status, also student ID. So how could these two data sets be integrated to answer the research question? How can we integrate these two data? So we have to find out what is common between these two data sets. So in primary data, we have student ID. In secondary data, we also have student ID. So we can just merge these two data sets using the student ID, right? Then what kind of research question I can ask using this data set. Sorry, what kind of research question I can ask using this data set. Then what are the challenges that might arise? Challenges like, suppose I'm merging these two data set using student ID, and what if someone's student ID is absent, is empty? So in that case, we probably want to look for second source, which will help us to join the data along with student ID. So here, please.
I didn't follow that. I mean, it looks like you're trying to assess stress levels in students,
Yes.
and you're going to look at those parameters. So you're saying what type of question can be asked?
Yes. I'm saying that how can we, I'm asking different questions, many questions, like we have two data set, primary, secondary. Now, how can I, and this is primary data and secondary data is from the same population, is coming from the same population. Yes, this is primary and this is secondary. Yes, from the institution, same institution that I'm collecting. Yes, yes. Match how, first question is, how can I match that? Using what? Because probably not all students participated in the primary data, right? Primary data collection phase. So how can I match those two data? Student ID, I can do it using a student ID, but it might happen that some students, student ID is missing. It might not happen, but it can happen. Then I have to look for some other records, like their name, as a secondary matching point. Then we can do that also. Then we want to ask, as you mentioned, that how stress levels and dietary is affecting their project, their project completion, their CGPA, their success in their study, how this is affecting. So we can do that. So this survey data, this measures behavioral and psychological factors, right? And the administrative data that we have as a secondary data set is measures the academic performance. So we can merge these data sets using student ID, and we can figure out the correlation or the cause and effect relation between this two between the variables using these two data sets, right? So now, what is the main advantage of integrating this data? This produces a richer data set combining both psychological and performance variables, and then allows cross-validation. Cross-validation in a sense of, does stress predict CGPA? Meaning, student who is stressed and he cannot sleep at night properly, he won't be able to concentrate in his class. He he won't be able to concentrate in his class, then he won't be able to do his homework properly, and he's stressed all the time. He does not have proper sleep. Um, he has a problem in his dietary, and so this will eventually affect his scores in the exam. So and eventually the CGPA. So we can actually cross-validate using these two data set, primary and secondary. And also this enhances the statistical power by combining complementary information. Complementary information meaning whatever we found out in the secondary data, we can complement that using the primary data. We can investigate more. We can design the questions variables as per our need, and this will minimize our type 2 error. Then what are the potential challenges or limitations? data privacy, because we need IRB approval for the primary data collection. And then there can be missing identifiers, as I was talking, that if student IDs are missing, then or inconsistent, then merging fails. So we have to look for another primary key to join these two data. And then the time alignment, survey located in one semester, CGPA data is coming from another semester. That will be disastrous, because students who were struggling, who were having problem, who were stressed, they probably will do bad in that specific semester, not the other semester. Probably they will recover later. So we have to make sure the time is aligned. And the data format. This is data formation nowadays is actually not a problem. But we can, this is a challenge, but definitely it can be overcome easily at any moment. So if we have the data in one format, we can definitely change into another format. So what could we learn through integration? Relationship with relationships, stress level, and academic performance. Data integration enhances both depth and reliability of analysis. Then influence of sleep or diet on lab attendance or project success, as I was talking. Then here, most important step is finding out the primary key to join the data. Like in our case, it was patient ID or student ID. Then predictive patterns for students who actually drop outs. And so we can find out that students who has depression, who has stress, if they're dropping out or not. So how can we help them? So now we are going to compare quality dimensions. So we have different dimensions for primary and secondary data. We have validity, reliability, completeness, bias, risk. And we are hoping that whoever collecting the primary data and whoever collected the secondary data, they did a good job. Because if they don't do a good job, anything will fail. Everything here, all the dimensions we have here will fail. So for validity, primary data has high if designed well. If designed well means they did a good job. They did as per their expectation. And for secondary data, that can vary validity, because if the data is collected 30 years ago, 50 years ago, I was doing a thesis, and in my thesis we had a data that was collected in England from a hospital around times 1967, 68. So it is very tough to find out the validity of the data. So because that can be a very good data set, or that can be somehow contaminated. Then we have reliability. Researchers controlled for primary data, meaning researcher can control the biases. Researcher can control the observer's bias, the recall bias from the respondents. And secondary data that depend on the source, where we are taking the data from. Completeness. This is completeness limited by study scope. We can have missing data, but we have to make sure that we actually define those missing data in the dictionary properly. For secondary data, often expensive but not topic specific. As I was talking, as for bias, we can have researchers bias for primary data, but that can be minimized if we do a good job. And for secondary data, there also is a risk of biasness, recall bias, collection bias, design bias. Then for data cleaning and preparation differences, we have few steps. We are going to look for primary and secondary data for these steps. For missing values, if we have missing values, if we are collecting the data primarily, then we can minimize the missing values because we are doing it in current time, so we can minimize that. But for secondary data that is tough. If there is no information about these missing values, it's tough to fill up those values. Then standardization. Standardization is research defined for primary data. Suppose we have one variable in some format, another variable in other format. So we have to standardize everything properly in one way, so that all have synchronization. All variables have synchronization among them. For metadata, primary data is created by the researcher, and for secondary data, there must have some documentation and dictionary properly explaining the variables, the factors. Validation for primary data, internal consistency checks, and secondary data, we have to cross-check the sources. So the missing variable dilemma. So when we are studying how diet affects academic performance, and we are using the secondary data, and secondary data set lacks nutrition data, which is very important in a diet, and definitely for the medical students' performance in class while doing their assignments in their exam. So if we have a situation like that, what can we do? How can we select data, or how can we actually close these gaps? We can collect supplemental primary data. That is one way. We can use proxies. Proxies meaning here, as an example, BMI, meaning suppose we don't have the nutrition data, but we might have some variable that is very similar to nutrition data. So we can use that. But definitely there is always a question. And reframe the research question, which we don't want to do. We always want to stick to our research question because this is our plan. This is what motivates us to do a research. So, but that can be one solution. Yeah, sure. That's why I say that. That's why I say that. That is the that was our motivation, the research question, to do the research. So nobody wants to do that, but we can definitely put it in our slide as a point. Yeah.
Either it's negative, then another research. That would be the
Yeah, yeah.
but we would not want to backtrack to like, these data now point in this direction. Let me change my research question. That's not necessarily ethical because the loop.
Actually, something like that happened. Not exactly, but I can give you a similar example. So I was working on a project, on a research work, and I had some co-authors with that, and we were collecting primary data, and they had some pre-assumed understanding of something, that they see things in a different way. They don't want to rely on, after collecting the data, we'll find some results. They didn't want to do that. They know what the answer is, and they want to actually manipulate the answer so that they can have that answer at the end. Yes, and people can do that. I mean, I would say in corporate world, suppose um, it happens a lot actually. Suppose some company is funding some research work, and it will only show that this is beneficial to their product. I mean, it happened with tea in Indian subcontinent, right? It happened with tea. because the British, they wanted to sell the tea as much as where there is no health benefit, but they showed there are benefits. Yeah. 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 Okay, so okay, so we finished this one. Then let's next move on to the next one, data evaluation checklist. So again, does the data directly answer the research question, which is the most important thing in data collection and in a research? And are the key variables defined consistently? Is the data current and representative? We cannot have a backdated data that will not actually represent our population, our target population that we are working with. This is a problem with secondary data. And are there any ethical and legal limitations? Can we validate the data with other sources? We can do data triangulation with using other sources, validate our data. Probably we have many sources on the internet for secondary data. We can actually do that. Common pitfalls for when merging data sources. Inconsistent variables, as I was talking, that suppose I'm merging using the primary key student ID, but I do not have, I have missing values in there. So there will be some gap. There will be some records where I won't be able to merge the data. So for an example, I can think also there can be inconsistency in variables like age. In some variable, age is recorded as years, but in some other data, the data that I'm merging with, there the variable is defining as birth date. The age is defining using birth date, or using or the format is not similar. Then we have non-matching identifiers, different patient's ID, missing unique identifiers, the one that I was talking about, then duplicates or conflicting records, same subject appearing twice with slightly different values. Suppose we have someone's age written in one column as just years, and in some other columns we have suppose 33 years, in other it is 33.00 or 33.5, because they are calculating even the months. Then missing metadata, poor documentation. So without data dictionary, you're risking to misinterpret the variables. Then we have privacy and ethical issues like FERPA, HIPAA. There are tools for data collection and management, as we all are aware of: REDCap, Qualtrics, Open Data Kit. REDCap, widely used in health science and clinical research. It is secure and HIPAA compliant. And then Qualtrics, ideal for social sciences, marketing and behavioral research. Then this integrates with Excel, R, Python, and API automation, so which is really good. And then Open Data Kit, where open source mobile-based data collection used for field and global studies. Then at the last slide, we have data documentation and reproducibility practices. So when we are collecting data, we also want to keep it safe. We're going to put it in the safe. So create a data dictionary so that whenever someone is using this data later in time, they can they can know the definitions about the variables, the number of records, the format easily. They don't have to be confused. Then we have record data provenance, track where each data came from, the sources, data version, use reproductive workflows, maintain scripts for cleaning and analysis in any software that you're using, probably R, Python, C. Use version control like GitHub, where if anything changes in the documentation, it can be updated in the GitHub. I also use GitHub. It's a very useful tool. And then ensure fair principles like findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And archive data responsibly. Share anonymized data sets in repositories like Zenodo. So we have to make sure that we actually save our data properly for later use. Thank you so much, Dr. Shandu. It's just us, three of us. Yeah. I'm going to stop recording.